It was one of those in New York City where the sky seemed to press down on the earth, a suffocating gray blanket that promised nothing but despair. The streets were alive with chaos, honking taxis, hurried footsteps of people bundled against the biting cold, and the relentless hum of a city that never stopped moving. Amidst this urban madness, outside a small bakery in Brooklyn, a golden dog appeared as if out of nowhere. His thin frame trembled under layers of matted fur caked with dirt and grime, physical proof of days spent wandering alone. But what struck me most were his eyes, large brown pools of sorrow so deep they seemed to swallow light itself. He sat there silently amidst the rush of humanity, ignored by everyone who passed by, his presence almost ghostly. And then it happened, a moment that made my heart stop. A taxi screeched around the corner, its tires skidding dangerously close to him. The dog leapt back just in time, his body shaking not just from fear, but also exhaustion. The driver yelled something obscene before speeding off without a second glance, leaving behind only the echo of his engine and a helpless animal now more terrified than ever. As if mocking his plight, a bitter wind swept through the street, carrying with it the damp, musty scent of alleyways long forgotten. It howled like a mournful cry, emphasizing the dog's isolation in a world too busy to care. For a brief moment, I felt as though the entire universe had conspired to abandon him. Yet he remained still, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, as if clinging to hope despite all odds. As Maria stood behind the counter arranging a tray of muffins, her gaze drifted toward the window. There he was, the golden dog, sitting motionless on the cold pavement outside, his large brown eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt strangely familiar. It wasn't just hunger or desperation in those eyes. It was something deeper, almost like a silent plea that seemed to pierce through the chaos of the bustling bakery. Maria froze for a moment, her hands hovering over the tray as memories she had long buried began to resurface. She remembered Max, the golden retriever from her childhood, and how his eyes used to hold the same quiet dignity. Could it be possible? Summoning her courage, Maria stepped outside, ignoring the biting chill in the air. The dog didn't move at first, but then slowly approached her, his trembling body betraying his exhaustion. He placed his paw gently on her hand, and in that instant, the noise of the city, the honking cars, the hurried footsteps seemed to vanish. It was as if time itself had stopped, leaving only Maria and this mysterious creature who seemed to carry the weight of years in his gaze. But not everyone shared her sentiment. A gruff customer stormed out of the bakery, muttering angrily, "Don't let that filthy thing inside. It doesn't belong here." His words stung, and for a brief moment Maria hesitated. Yet, when she looked back at the dog, now shivering under the light drizzle beginning to fall, her resolve hardened. The rain soaked into his matted fur, making him look even more fragile. She realized that if she turned away now, he wouldn't survive another night on these unforgiving streets. Her heart ached as she knelt beside him, feeling the cold seep through her jeans. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she was speaking to him or to herself. In that moment, Maria knew this wasn't just an act of kindness, it felt like fate pulling her toward something she couldn't yet fully understand. As the golden dog sat trembling outside Maria's bakery, a few customers began to notice him. A young boy, no older than 8, tugged at his mother's hand with wide, pleading eyes. "Mommy, can we take him home? He's so sad." The boy's voice was filled with innocence and desperation, but his mother yanked him away without hesitation. "We can't save everything, sweetie," she said sharply, her tone cold and dismissive as if closing the door on hope itself. The boy looked back one last time, tears welling in his eyes, but his small protests were drowned out by the relentless hum of the city. The scene grew darker when a disheveled man stumbled out of a nearby bar, reeking of alcohol. His steps were unsteady, and his laughter pierced through the air like shards of broken glass. Without warning, he kicked viciously at the dog, who flinched and whimpered in pain. "Get out of here, mutt!" he barked, laughing cruelly before staggering off into the night. Maria watched from inside, her chest tightening as though an invisible hand had gripped her heart. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. How could someone be so heartless? Her hands clenched into fists against the counter, nails digging into her palms. But what stung most wasn't just the cruelty, it was the indifference that followed. Passers-by barely glanced at the incident. Some even rolled their eyes or muttered complaints about the disruption. Life in New York moved forward relentlessly, swallowing stories like this whole without a second thought. The elderly woman who earlier murmured about her lost retriever now hurried past, clutching her bag tighter, unwilling to get involved. Even the young man who had thrown away his bagel moments ago avoided eye contact altogether. It was as if humanity had collectively turned its back on the fragile creature sitting alone in the cold. Maria stood frozen behind the window, torn between anger and helplessness. This wasn't just a stray dog anymore, it was a mirror reflecting something far uglier about the world around her. And yet, amidst the chaos, the dog remained eerily still, his large brown eyes fixed on her as if silently begging for salvation. Maria's decision to help the dog came with a price she hadn't anticipated. With trembling hands, she opened the bakery door and ushered him inside, ignoring the sharp glares from customers who immediately wrinkled their noses in disgust. "You can't bring that filthy thing in here," one man barked, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation like a knife. He stood up abruptly, pointing at the dog as if it were some kind of invader. "This is a bakery, not a shelter," another customer muttered under her breath about health codes, while others simply stared in disapproval. But worse was yet to come. A tall, broad-shouldered man approached Maria, his face red with anger. "I'm warning you," he growled, jabbing a finger toward her chest. "If you don't get rid of that trash, I'll call the cops myself." His words hung heavy in the air, a threat that sent a chill down Maria's spine. The tension in the room grew palpable, thick enough to suffocate. Even her own employee, Sarah, shot her a worried glance, whispering urgently, "Maybe we should just let him go. We're losing customers over this." Despite the mounting pressure, something deep within Maria refused to back down. She knelt beside the dog, examining him more closely, and what she found made her blood run cold. Beneath the matted fur on his hind leg was a deep, festering wound-raw skin worn away by what appeared to be a tightly bound chain. Her stomach churned at the sight. Whoever had done this had left him not only abandoned, but tortured. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized the extent of his suffering. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly to the dog, stroking his head gently. Then, turning to the crowd, she raised her voice, surprising even herself. "If anyone has a problem with this, they're welcome to leave. But this dog stays." Her words echoed through the bakery, silencing the murmurs temporarily. Knowing she couldn't handle another confrontation, Maria made an abrupt decision. She closed the shop early, flipping the sign to "closed" before anyone could protest further. As the last customer stormed out, slamming the door behind them, Maria exhaled deeply, her heart pounding in her chest. For now, the dog was safe, but she knew the battle wasn't over. That night, as the temperature dropped and the streets of Brooklyn grew eerily quiet, Maria knew she couldn't leave the dog behind. The thought of him shivering alone in the cold was unbearable. Wrapping him in an old blanket from the bakery, she led him out into the dimly lit streets, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. But their journey home wasn't without peril. As they turned onto a narrow alleyway, a group of rowdy teenagers staggered toward them, their laughter sharp and menacing. One of them sneered at Maria, pointing at the dog. "What's this? Your new pet, lady?" Another stepped closer, his voice slurred but threatening. "You better get out of here before we teach that mutt a lesson." Maria's breath caught in her throat as she tightened her grip on the leash, her body instinctively shielding the dog. She could feel his trembling form pressed against her leg, his fear mirroring her own. Summoning every ounce of courage, she glared at them. "Leave us alone," she snapped, her voice shaking but firm. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The tension hung heavy in the air. Then one of the teens laughed mockingly and waved her off. "Whatever, crazy lady." They stumbled away, their jeers fading into the distance, but Maria's nerves remained frayed. When they finally reached her small apartment, relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she bathed the dog, gently scrubbing away layers of dirt and grime, she uncovered something horrifying: a jagged scar on his neck, evidence of a collar worn too tight for too long. Worse still, as she examined his belly, she found an old wound, partially healed but unmistakably inflicted by violence. Her hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the scars, imagining the pain he must have endured. Tears welled up in her eyes as anger and sorrow overwhelmed her. Who could do such a thing to an innocent creature? And yet, despite everything, the dog sat calmly, trusting her completely. In that moment, Maria vowed silently that no harm would ever come to him again, not while she had breath in her body. That night, as Maria lay in bed with the golden dog curled up at her feet, sleep came uneasily. Her mind was a storm of unanswered questions and half-formed memories. Just as she drifted off, a vivid dream seized her consciousness. She found herself standing in a dense, shadowy forest, the air thick with an eerie silence. Max, her childhood Max, was there, his golden fur glowing faintly in the dim light. He looked at her with those same soulful brown eyes, then turned and began to walk deeper into the woods. "Wait," she called out, her voice trembling. But he didn't stop. She followed him, her heart pounding as the trees closed in around her, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The forest seemed endless, suffocating, until they reached a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. There, beneath an ancient twisted tree, stood a small wooden bench, the very one from the park where the golden dog had led her earlier that day. Maria's breath caught in her throat as Max turned to look at her one last time before vanishing into the mist. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if she'd been running for miles. Shaken but unable to shake the feeling that the dream meant something, Maria got out of bed and began rummaging through an old drawer she hadn't opened in years. Her fingers brushed against something fragile, a faded photograph. When she pulled it out, her hands trembled. It was a picture of her as a child, sitting on that same bench in the park with Max by her side. The resemblance between the dog in the photo and the one now sleeping peacefully in her living room was uncanny. Maria sank onto the floor, clutching the photo to her chest. This couldn't be a coincidence. Every detail, the scar on his neck, the medallion, the park, even the dream felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. But what terrified her most was the realization that perhaps this wasn't just about reuniting with Max. It was about confronting the pain she'd buried for so long. The next morning, Maria awoke to the sound of soft scratching at her apartment door. It was Max's eager yet patient eyes fixed on her as if urging her to follow him. Confused but intrigued, she grabbed a jacket and an improvised leash, then stepped outside with him into the crisp air. Without hesitation, Max led her through the labyrinth of New York streets, his steps deliberate and confident, as though he were retracing a path etched deep in his memory. After nearly half an hour of walking, they arrived at a small, forgotten park nestled between towering buildings. The moment they entered, Maria froze. Everything about this place felt hauntingly familiar: the twisted tree by the corner, the weathered wooden bench beneath it, even the faint scent of damp earth after last night's drizzle. This was the same park where she and Max had spent countless afternoons together, escaping the chaos of her childhood home. Her chest tightened as memories flooded back, sharp and unrelenting. Just as she began to process the weight of this discovery, dark clouds gathered overhead. Within moments, a torrential downpour erupted, drenching them both. Panicked, Maria and Max sought refuge under a large oak tree whose branches barely shielded them from the relentless rain. She clutched Max close, feeling his trembling body against hers. For a fleeting second, she wondered if this was some cruel twist of fate, a test to see if she truly deserved to uncover the truth. As the storm raged on, an elderly woman approached, clutching an umbrella. She paused, staring at Max with wide, astonished eyes. "I know this dog," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He used to wander around a shelter in Queens years ago. They called him Lucky, but I always suspected he belonged to someone." Then, almost hesitantly, she added, "There was a name engraved on his collar. Max." Maria's breath hitched. The name hit her like a thunderclap, confirming what she had begun to suspect. Max wasn't just any stray dog, he was her Max, returned to her after all these years. The next morning, Maria and the golden dog boarded the subway to Queens, their journey silent but heavy with unspoken questions. When they arrived at Hope Haven Animal Shelter, the sight of the rundown building struck Maria like a punch to the gut. The peeling paint, the rusted gate, it all seemed symbolic of forgotten stories and abandoned dreams. A middle-aged woman named Ellen greeted them with a warm but weary smile, her eyes lighting up when she saw the dog. "Oh, I remember this boy," she said softly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "We used to call him Lucky. He came here years ago, but he disappeared one day. We never figured out where he went." Maria's heart raced as Ellen retrieved an old envelope containing a silver medallion, the same medallion that had been attached to his collar when he first arrived. Her hands trembled as she held it, the name Max engraved on its surface unmistakable. But it was what she found on the back that shattered her composure completely. Tiny letters etched faintly into the metal, "Never give up hope." The words hit her like a tidal wave, each syllable resonating deep within her soul. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she realized how profoundly personal this message felt, as if fate itself had inscribed it just for her. Ellen watched Maria carefully, her expression softening. "You know," she began hesitantly, "Lucky or Max, if that's his real name, always seemed different. He wasn't like the other dogs. It was as though he was waiting for someone. Every time we tried to connect him with a new family, he'd pull away, almost as if he already belonged somewhere else." Ellen paused, her gaze drifting toward the dog sitting quietly beside Maria. He carried something inside him, a kind of quiet, like he knew he'd find who he was looking for eventually. Maria clutched the medallion tightly, her mind reeling. She felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, revealing truths she wasn't ready to face. Yet, amidst the chaos of emotions, one thing became clear: Max had never stopped searching for her. And now, against all odds, they had found each other again. Maria's hands trembled as she held the silver medallion, the name Max etched into its surface, staring back at her like a ghost from the past. It couldn't be real, could it? Decades had passed since her childhood, and yet here he was, the same golden retriever who had once been her constant companion, her confidant during the darkest days of her youth. Ellen's words echoed in her mind. He always seemed to be waiting for someone. Maria's heart clenched painfully as the truth began to sink in. This wasn't just any dog, this was her Max. Later that evening, after returning home with Max by her side, Maria stumbled upon an old box tucked away in the corner of her closet. Inside, beneath layers of forgotten memorabilia, was a sealed envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting. Her breath caught as she opened it, the brittle paper crackling under her fingers. The letter was filled with raw emotion, regret, sorrow, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. "I never should have taken Max away from you," he wrote. "He was stronger than I ever was. I hope that one day Max will find his way back to you." The final sentence hit her like a sledgehammer, shattering whatever walls she had built around her heart over the years. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the letter to her chest, her sobs echoing through the quiet apartment. She looked at Max, who sat quietly beside her, his large brown eyes watching her with an expression she now recognized as patience. For years, she had convinced herself that Max must have forgotten her, that time and distance would have erased their bond. But now she understood he had never stopped searching. Every step he took, every mile he wandered, had been driven by a single, unyielding purpose: to find her. Her heart felt as though it were being torn apart, not just by guilt, but by awe. How could a creature so fragile, so battered by life, still hold on to hope with such unwavering strength? As she knelt beside him, burying her face in his fur, she whispered hoarsely, "You found me, didn't you?" Maria's heart raced as she approached the old house in Queens, Max by her side. The address linked to Mr. Howard had led her here, but something about the decrepit building filled her with dread. Before she could knock, a gruff neighbor stormed out, his face contorted with suspicion. "What do you think you're doing?" he'd barked. "This property isn't yours anymore." Maria stammered an explanation, but he cut her off, accusing her of trespassing. For a moment she considered leaving, but Max's calm presence steadied her resolve. Inside the dusty basement, Maria uncovered a small wooden box labeled with her name in faded ink. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing childhood trinkets and a photo of her and Max playing in the yard. Beneath it lay a handwritten letter from her late father. Each word was heavy with regret. "I was wrong to take Max away from you. I didn't realize he was your only joy." Tears blurred her vision as guilt and sorrow collided within her. The man who had once been so unyielding now admitted his mistake, but too late for her to forgive him. As Maria sat there, clutching the letter, Max rested his head on her lap, as if reminding her that they were finally together again. As Maria and Max stepped into the apartment, the first howls of a fierce storm began to echo through the city. The wind roared like a living beast, rattling windows and shaking the very foundation of the building. Rain lashed against the glass in relentless waves, as if nature itself was testing their resolve. Yet, inside, something miraculous unfolded. For the first time in her life, Maria felt an overwhelming sense of peace, not despite the chaos outside, but because of it. She knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his sturdy frame, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "We're home now, aren't we?" Max responded by gently licking her hand, his large brown eyes filled with a quiet understanding that transcended words. In that moment, Maria realized this wasn't just about finding each other. It was about healing wounds that had festered for years, her guilt over losing him, his pain of wandering alone. The storm raged on, but within those four walls, none of it mattered anymore. They sat together under the dim glow of a single lamp, its soft light casting shadows that seemed almost protective. Outside, the world might have been falling apart, but here, they were untouchable, a pair finally reunited after decades of separation. Inspired by her journey with Max, Maria decided to write a book about their reunion, pouring her heart into every word. She titled it "Never Give Up Hope," a phrase that echoed the inscription on the locket she had discovered. Writing it wasn't easy. Memories she thought she had buried resurfaced with overwhelming clarity: her father's anger, Max's disappearance, and the years of guilt that followed. Yet, as she recounted their story, she realized how much they had both healed. The book became more than just a memoir. It was a testament to resilience, love, and the power of never giving up. When the book was published, it sparked an unexpected phenomenon. Readers from all over began sharing their own stories of loss and rediscovery. A woman wrote about finding her long-lost brother after decades apart, while another recounted reuniting with a childhood friend who had helped her through trauma. Each story mirrored Maria's journey, proof that hope could endure even in the darkest times. However, not everyone embraced the message. Critics accused her of romanticizing hardship, forcing Maria to defend her story publicly. Despite this, she stood firm, knowing the impact her words had on those who needed them most. Max sat faithfully beside her during book signings, his presence a living reminder of their bond. Together, they inspired countless others to believe in second chances.